So now let's talk about connection. Energizers connect. They connect human beings because they are highly reciprocal exercises. They're synchronous. They're present. They're back and forth. They're yes and. All these characteristics that we've discussed previously really are highlighted in many of the energizers that we do and in many of the most impactful energizers. This is a really good example. This is the "if you really knew me, you would know that" exercise. Very basic. Partner A stands in front of partner B, looks into her eyes and begins by saying, "If you really knew me, you would know that." And they fill in the blank. Then immediately they repeat the phrase just a little faster this time. "If you really knew me, you would know that." And then you fill in the blank again, and so on and so forth. And that lasts for 1 full minute. Once that minute is over, then we switch, and it's partner B's turn to begin with "if you really knew me, you would know that." So we call this incremental self-disclosure, right? Back to this idea of vulnerability, starting to open up very, very gradually. This is a really good exercise to do, particularly in the beginning of workshops where people are getting to know each other. And so connection is definitely a theme that comes up often when we discuss the power of energizers. Another way to connect quickly, particularly as a facilitator with your audience, is by learning people's names. This is something that I've been using for many years now, and it's simple, straightforward, really breaks the ice, gets people focused, recognizing that you care about them, that you know a little bit about them, right? You can do a little bit of research about their background through LinkedIn. I generally print out people's faces and I write their names in the back of these pictures. And so I do a little bit of flip card exercises while I'm working out at the gym. And after a day or so, I've memorized everybody's names. And not only is it helpful to help people feel like you care, but it also helps you feel like you are just a little bit more connected to the students or to the audience or to the employees that will be dropping by your event. This might not be necessarily a energizer per se, but it definitely is a powerful tip that will enable you to execute even better energizers once the event begins. This is a really interesting piece of research out of Jerusalem, Israel, a hospital there. What they did is that they separated doctors into two camps. Group one received an image of an individual's radiology case, and they had details of the patient in text next to that radiology case. And the doctor needed to interpret it and come up with a diagnosis. The second group did something similar. They received the same radiology cases, right? But instead of just having text, there was a picture of the actual patient in the file. And so it turns out that the second group, the doctors that saw the face and the name of the individual along with the radiology case, were much better at diagnosing and much more accurate at diagnosing and spent much more time doing the diagnosis. So there's something about our circuits in the brain when we see a visual image of an individual, when we recognize them, when we can tie a name to a face, that helps us feel just a little bit more connected. So music is another really useful tool for human connection. It may not be an energizer per se, but if you think back, it's definitely a part of many useful energizers. Jerusalema Dance, of course, involves that catchy song where people are coordinating their movements together. Right? I use music to set the right tone and mood when people walk into the workshop space. I use music to bring people's energy up. Just like an energizer, it's a very subtle way to influence the way that people are feeling and responding to the environment. Not only that, music helps our biology's coordinate at really, really deep and interesting levels. And so what I want to do now is I want to play a really beautiful string quintet. And while you listen to this piece of music, envision yourself in a room with a lot of other human beings. And after we listen to this, I'll tell you a little bit about the results of a study that was done on these individuals. So while I watch this, I get reminded of a couple of weeks ago, I went to see my daughter play her viola. And one of her classmates was just so incredibly talented. She got really deep into this beautiful piece. And I started to connect really emotionally with the piece. And I caught myself just starting to cry very, very gently. And the most fascinating thing is that as soon as the song ended, I turned to my left and there was a woman looking straight at me, and she was also crying. And so, of course, we can all reflect on how music helps our emotions coordinate. But back to this study, it turns out that the individuals that were listening to this particular quintet that I just played you were also hooked up to all kinds of biomeasurement tools, breathing patterns, heart rate, sweat patterns, right? And the individuals listening to the song, their rhythms in sweat and heartbeat and breathing, they literally aligned with one another to the T. Incredible graphs of heart rate going up during intense periods of the song and then going down later on and back up. And so it turns out that our bodies are literally aligning themselves with the bodies of other human beings while we listen and enjoy music. So use it to your advantage. So the hard-nosed and scientific ones of you might be thinking, well, okay, that's interesting that our bodies coordinate, but how does that apply to the reason why I'm taking this course, to be a better leader, a better manager, a better innovator, a better team leader? Well, it turns out that at Stanford, they did this really, really interesting piece of research on human synchrony and the impact that synchrony has on the way we cooperate with one another, right? And so the way that they did this study is that they divided people into 4 different camps. One camp did no singing and no moving together. Another camp did singing and moving, but asynchronously. They sang and moved at different periods of time. Another group of individuals sang synchronously, so they sang together in the same room at the same time. And then finally, the 4th group, the 4th camp, did singing together and moving together, right? And so later, these groups of individuals were asked to participate in a very common economic exercise, an economic experiment, where you have a pot of money for yourself, and then you're asked to share X amount of money of that particular pot with your team members. And it turns out, of course, I wouldn't be showing you this if there wasn't any impact of synchrony, that the groups that moved and danced together synchronously were willing to share much more to their teammates than the groups of individuals that didn't sing and dance at all. And of course, more than the groups that sang and danced, but asynchronously, and more than the group of individuals that only sang together. So there's something about sharing the song, the movement, the singing, the whole experience that eventually, I guess, makes us feel a little bit more not only connected, but according to this study, responsible to one another, right? Where we see ourselves more as a whole group after the event is over, that makes us want to share and contribute more to that whole group. We talk about the free rider effect often in my classes, where there's always one or two individuals that don't want to participate as much in the team, don't want to contribute. So now we know that if we engage teams with energizers that help them sing and dance synchronously to sync up their biologies and their emotions, they're also going to want to become more responsible, dedicated, and contributing teammates. So now that we know this, the next energizer that I want to introduce in the connection section won't catch you by surprise. It's the empathy dance. What basically we do is we ask partners to dance in front of each other, where partner A is doing the dancing and partner B is just literally mirroring the movements of the other individual. We can do this with music, we can do this without music, but what's important is to force the couple to literally mimic and mirror each other's movements. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, stop. Woo! 10 seconds! Come on, Yuki! 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Okay, stop. Run. Go. Another thing that energizers help do is to get people connected physically through touch. Some exercises, of course, involve physical touch. And also the gaze. Eye contact is a major part of many, many energizers that we do. And this particular piece of research for me is fascinating. It comes from a nursing school in Adelaide, Australia. And what they do in this research is to understand how profoundly connected we are through gaze and touch, and how important it is for people, particularly in the medical sector, doctors, nurses, to understand that their responsibility isn't only about sharing technical data with the patient, but also to be able to connect with them through eyes gazing and touch. I've spent significant amounts of time in the hospital setting, and I remember clearly that every time that the nurses touch me, either my feet or my hands or my shoulders, I just felt a sense of support and of healing. And it turns out that the science proves that every time that we connect through our eyes with another person, or that we feel human touch, our bodies actually respond biologically in really, really positive ways. So I'm going to actually read straight from this article that is just so clear that this is not only something that we sense, but it's something that's actually happening in our bodies. One of the most powerful human interactions is face-to-face contact involving eye gaze. The interaction between trusted individuals creates a neural duet, right? They're using this phrase that sounds a lot like dance, duet, between brains due to the reciprocal firing of the brain's social networking areas, with a powerful effect on the level of trust and empathy, as well as a positive attitudinal shift. In other words, it makes people feel happy. Face-to-face contact involves the activation of mirror and spindle neurons. Mirror neurons are the neurons that, of course, help us empathize with the emotions of other humans. When interacting with trusted others, a number of chemicals are released, including oxytocin and vasopressin. Oxytocin, of course, is the love hormone, the hormone that we get during orgasms or during childbirth, both of which help to lower the physiological stress response and aid growth and wound healing. Social interaction becomes an interactive process of positive feedback whereby increased levels of oxytocin in turn encourage greater levels of gaze to the eye region of human faces. This dynamic further increases the level of trust and empathy between the interacting parties. So it's this beautiful positive spiral where the more you look into someone's eyes, the more oxytocin you receive in the brain, and the more oxytocin you receive, the more inclined you are to stare into people's eyes. And it just evolves into this process of deep, visceral, biological connection with the people that you're working with. In this particular case, it's nurses and doctors at hospitals, but you can apply this, of course, to business work or government work or whatever teamwork that involves interpersonal dynamics. The gaze is such a powerful conduit to connection and understanding and eventual clear communication and all kinds of wonderful things. And so hence, the eye gazing exercise, this is one of the staples of my workshops. I ask participants to look into each other's eyes for 4 straight minutes in silence.
Minute.
I've done this in small crowds. I've done this in enormous crowds. I've done this in Asia. I've done this in Europe and the Middle East, many different places. And everywhere I do it, regardless of whether I do it with students or engineers or executives or whatever it is, it creates a deep sense of calm and connection. This is an example of a room full of extremely geeky and intellectually oriented PhDs and engineers from a leading technology and research firm in Norway, 400 individuals in the room. And I was encouraged not to do the exercise because I was told it was going to fall flat. I did it anyway, and it created this deep sense of common connection in the room. And again, if we think back to the research, now we understand why. I've done this with CEOs of big corporations. Here we have Thomas Williamson, the CEO of the biggest shipping company in the world, doing this exercise with his right-hand man. I've done this with the director of NAV, the largest employment agency, government agency in Norway. Interesting example here. We were in a very large room, and the director of NAV, Hans Christian, was doing this exercise with an employee from one of the NAV offices. And the employee started to get so nervous, and she started to laugh and to shake and to just feel very strange about looking into the eyes of the big boss. And at first I was a little bit freaked out. I didn't know exactly what was going to happen. Everybody kind of noticed. And Hans Christian just kind of very calmly started to move his face from left to right. And he started to smile very, very gently to this individual. And through that body language, through those really powerful, calm, nonverbal cues, the other person just finally started to calm down. They never broke eye contact. And when the 4 minutes were over, everyone was very, very calm indeed. I've seen such incredible transformations after this eye-gazing exercise. Another example, as I was invited to Korea, but by one of my closest mentors and friends, Jae Ho Park, who's right in the middle of this picture. And before I traveled to Korea, by his invitation, he called me and he said, "Hey, Federico, you know, eye staring exercise you do. Don't do in Korea. Don't do in Korea," he said. I have permission to imitate his accent, by the way. And I was like, why not? It's an exciting part of the workshop. It communicates empathy and connection. Like, no, Korea, lots of hierarchy, lots of very serious men. Don't do in Korea. It's like, okay, I'll think about it. Culturally, it might be a little tricky. And I remember traveling to Seoul and getting there, and there was this really, really big, fancy workshop with all the CEOs of the biggest corporations. And when the time came for the eye staring exercise, I decided to do it anyway. And there was this pair in the back of the room. It was a really, really senior manager, a very serious looking 60-year-old man. He was engaging in the exercise with a very young intern, a female intern. And the man in the beginning was crossing his arms and he was looking straight down to the ground. He didn't want to have anything to do with the eye gazing exercise. And the intern was trying to catch his eyes. He was like, kind of like, look at me. And I saw it from the side of my eyes, and I was like, oh my God, this is not going to go well. I remembered the warning that Jae-ho had given me. But luckily, after 1 or 2 minutes, the executive, he started to look around the room, and he noticed that everyone else in the room was engaged. They were enjoying it. It was quiet. It was calm. And he decided to finally engage in the gazing. And so he finally, during the last minute, looked into the eyes of this young intern. The young intern was glowing. She was so happy. And when I rang the bowl that I used to signal that the time is over, he stood up and he got very, very close to the intern. And then he bowed all the way down. He went really, really low, which is something that Koreans don't do. And very gradually, he got up again. And by then, he had tears in his eyes. He turned around very, very slowly, kind of like militaristically, and started to take steps out from the workshop room. And you could hear a pin drop in the room. Everybody's very, very quiet. So there's a lot of these responses, unexpected, spontaneous reactions that people have to this very deep biological response that is going on in our bodies. This is a study that's been done at Harvard for over 40 years now. It's called the still face experiment. It shows how deeply connected we are, particularly through facial gestures and eye gaze with one another. Even more importantly, how connected we are to our mothers.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age.
I'm like a girl. Oh.
And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her.
Yeah.
This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this. And then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, come on, why aren't we doing this? Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, They react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
Okay. I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, what a big girl.
So this is just a great example of how, without really recognizing it subconsciously, we're constantly scoping out the environment for connection, for interactions with other human beings. And we receive it often through different facial gestures and body language, right? Particularly when we're working intensely with a team, but we don't notice all the information that is going back and forth. And so when we engage in these dedicated exercises like the eye gazing exercise or the if you really knew me, you would know that exercise, in many different energizers, we're kind of forcing ourselves to compartmentalize, to recognize that there's something really powerful and particular happening during that particular connection. This happens as well with touch, as the Adelaide Nursing School article mentions. So I sometimes ask my students to give themselves wonderful massages. There, dig deep, go down, this is around Telenor, the neck. Get creative, 20 seconds. Global telecom company. Enjoy getting deep into the massage. There we go, that's what I'm talking about, man. Do you have any Swedes in the room? Okay, get in there with your Swedish massage. Beauty. 5 seconds. 4. Keep going. 3. 2. 1. Okay, stop. No, you can take your seats, please. I'm joking.
This one's tighter, yeah. My right next to
Williamson,
yeah, right there where you are right now. That is like tight. Yeah.
30 seconds.
And my they're sort of both
Five final seconds.
Oh, damn, we got close.
Okay, stop. Take each other, please. So, of course, not only does this help people connect at a very kind of lighthearted and friendship-oriented perspective, but there's a lot of other stuff going on in the background, right? We might be giggling and being silly and doing a lot of this kind of vulnerability and reciprocity. But the interesting thing about these studies is that it shows that when you are touched by other individuals, of course, in appropriate ways, the body responds and the brain responds in all kinds of wonderful ways that human beings are basically wired for. So if you think that this is a little too much to ask, I want to tell you an even wilder story. So this was 1999. Shell Oil Company had developed one of the largest offshore platforms ever developed, if not the largest. It cost $1.45 billion. It was a massive structure, and they were interested in increasing the safety and security of the people working on this offshore platform. And so they brought in a team of psychological safety experts, not only physical safety, but also psychological safety experts. And they engaged the workers of this massive platform in many months of exercises that, of course, involved lots of team dynamic and vulnerability-oriented exercises that help build that psychological safety amongst the team of workers of that platform. And one of the exercises that they did required two individuals to take off their shoes and their socks and to have one person start to massage the feet of the oil platform worker for a while with oil, right? And then exchange the massaging with the other person doing the massaging of the oil platform worker's feet, right? Think about how personal, how intimate of an experience that could end up being. And of course, if you understand the background to all this, hopefully now you'll start to understand that it's not only a wild, dumb, ridiculous exercise, but it's an exercise of deep human connection. And if you're working with these oil workers in life and death circumstances in many ways, then you might as well be able to understand them at really intimate, deep levels, to have engaged with them physically, given that their work is so physical, in such a personal way. These lessons really do transfer from the strange Energizer, the massaging, into the more official work that we do on a day-to-day basis in such fluid fashion. Again, I get the benefit, the privilege to see dozens, if not hundreds of teams every year interact with one another. And the more they embrace these strange, potentially radical energizers, the better they become at doing the work that they've been hired to do. This is a quote straight from the research that was done during this Shell platform psychological safety training. Despite the extreme awkwardness, reluctance, and difficulty of this kind of sharing, in the end, the URSA workers came together and achieved an 84% decrease in Shell's accident rate at the time, and simultaneously exceeded its productivity rate too. This was research done by a Stanford scholar and a Harvard scholar. And not only were there results in safety, but there, of course, results eventually in the bottom line and all kinds of really helpful metrics that they identified that potentially stemmed from these kinds of energizers and exercises that help people connect. This is another really good example of the evolution of individuals and the programs that I teach. Here's a picture of Telenor executives really getting close physically, right? And particularly in the beginning, it might feel a little awkward or very awkward, but eventually you start to recognize that because we are embodied human beings, as we've discussed very early on in this course, and because the closer we become, the less boundaries and protection and masks that we hold with one another, the more honest we can become, the more authentic, right? It's all connected. And this is what a participant of a recent workshop said about this. Over the course of 4 days, I felt everything: overwhelmed, exposed, nervous, tired, transformed, but most of all, grateful. I learned how powerful vulnerability can be, how creating a safe space for people to show up as themselves makes all the difference, and how syncing up with others can create real magic. From crazy icebreakers that had us crying from laughing, to Viking sauna experiences, cat therapy sessions, deep talks, collaboration, and breaking down personal boundaries, you guys made it truly unforgettable. Such a clear description of the process of humans becoming connected more and more through energizers.